Good morning, freshmen and all those joining us. My name is Ismael Karim. Today, we have the honor of welcoming award-winning Mexican author Juan Pablo Villalobos. Mr. Villalobos was born in Guadalajara, Mexico in 1973. He studied marketing and Spanish literature. His work as a writer includes articles for international publications as well as short stories and 4 novels. Mr. Villalobos is the author of our school-wide summer reading book, The Other Side. This piece of work explores child migration through the personal experiences of 10 teenagers. By weaving their stories together, the author creates an impactful and heartbreaking narrative. By the end of this event, we hope that you will recognize and accept the responsibility we all have to engage in local and global challenges through learning about problems and working towards solutions. Freshmen, as you continue on your journey here at SLUH, we invite you to get involved in activities that inspire and encourage you to live out our school mission. As students who develop critical minds and a lifelong devotion to learning that informs moral choices and transforms lives. This morning, the One World Club invites you to participate in a conversation about the stories portrayed in the book, The Other Side. We have the privilege of talking with Mr. Villalobos via Zoom from Barcelona, Spain. Señor Villalobos, buenas tardes y bienvenido. Now I'm going to pass it over to Freddie and Eli for some questions.
Good morning.
Morning.
We're gonna ask some introduction questions so people can get to know you a little bit better. First off, could you share with us some of your experiences as a high school student in Mexico?
Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and for reading The Other Side. I think this book was thought initially for this kind of purposes. I mean, my ambition, if I can say that, was that this book could reach schools, high schools, and to create discussions and debates around the issue of immigration. So that's why I'm very happy to be here with you today. And about my experience in high school in Mexico. Well, I have to say that I was born in Guadalajara, yes, but I lived in a small village called Lagos de Moreno in a region called Altos de Jalisco, which is something like the highlands of Jalisco. Jalisco is the state. And when I was 15 years old, I moved to Guadalajara, the capital of the state, to study the high school. So for me, high school was the time when I moved from the small village to the city, to a very big city. Guadalajara was at the time maybe a 4 or 5 million people city, a huge city, and everything was new for me. Not just the school. I mean everything, the context and my new life. So it was a very exciting experience to meet a lot of people, and at that time I was not very interested in literature, I have to say. I mean, I was obviously reading some novels or short stories, etc. But I wasn't thinking in becoming a writer. And it was during high school when I started writing. So that's the time of where my vocation was born, and so that's why I remember with a lot of love that time. It was the time where I started to write poetry to try to conquer some girls. and I was failing all the time. I mean, because my poetry was terrible. It was awful, and it was the only time when I wrote poetry. After that, I started to write short stories, and after that, novels and chronicles, and never again I wrote poetry.
Well, thank you for that, Senor Villalobos. My name's Freddie, and my next question for you is, why did you choose to write about migrant children?
Well, I am a migrant. I have been living abroad for 17 years. I left Mexico in 2003, and I mean, my situation is totally different of those of the teenagers in the book, but I have the experience of migration. And I have two kids who were born in Barcelona, and they are half Mexicans, half Brazilians, because his mother is Brazilian, and half Catalans. I mean, that's three halves, but it's like that. And they are in some way they belong to the place where they were born in Barcelona, but they are also Mexicans. They are also Brazilians. So I lived the reality of migration in my day to day, and obviously it's a subject that interested me for a long time, and I have been writing about migration also in my novels. And back in 2014, I was living in Brazil at the time. Maybe you don't remember because you are very young, but in 2014, in the Mexican-US border, there was this huge crisis of minor unaccompanied immigrants. There was around 70,000 kids who were detained in the border between the months of May, June, and July of 2014. And obviously this was all the time in the headlines of the news, and I was very worried about the situation. And a publisher of an American magazine, the editor of the magazine, contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in coming to Los Angeles to interview some kids and teenagers who had been through this experience. And why this editor thought about me? It's because I wrote a couple of books. My first novel, Down the Rabbit Hole, and my second novel, called Quesadillas. Both novels are narrated by the first one by a child narrator and the second one by a teenager. So he thought that I had the narrative tone, the voice, the ability to listen and to transform the voice of those kids and teenagers into literature. So he asked me to interview those kids and to tell their stories in first person. The idea was to tell the story in first person. I mean, the voice of the kids. So I went to LA. I interviewed a couple of teenagers, and we worked on those stories, and we published them in this magazine. And after this, my publisher, FSG, in the United States, thought that it would be a good idea to to make a book with more stories. I mean, with the same idea of telling the stories in first person, but with more stories. And it was a long process. That it started in 2014, but until 2016, I couldn't go to the United States to make the interviews and to listen to those kids and teenagers to finally tell their stories. So it started with a humanitarian crisis in the border. It started with a publisher, Michael Benoit, who asked me to go to interview those kids. And obviously I thought that it was important to tell their stories.
Well, thank you for your answers. We're gonna head to more specific questions about chapters in the book now. Thank you.
So in chapter 3 of The Other Side, Santiago and Danielle recounted their journey towards the other side is distressful. Their life is at risk every time they meet a new person acting as a coyote. And my question for you about this chapter is, do you think that the situation in El Salvador is truly hopeless for the youth?
I'm sorry, the end of the question was?
The question was, do you think that the situation in El Salvador is truly hopeless for the youth?
Yeah. Yeah, the truth is that these kids are refugees, as I proposed in the book. I mean, they are not exactly immigrants. They are refugees because they lived in their home countries, not just in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, in a very complicated situation. I mean, it's violence in the streets, violence in their families, poverty, lack of opportunities, lack of education, health, culture, etc. So for them, it is impossible to envision a possible future, and they need to find a new place to live. I mean, a possible place to live. I mean, it is impossible for them to stay in their countries because they would be in danger. And actually that, for me, is the critical issue. I mean, they are refugees because if you analyze the legal status, I mean, the normal thing is to think that refugees come from countries in war. But in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, there are no, a classic war. I mean, a war between two countries or a civil war. It's not exactly a war what they are living, but they are living in situations very similar to those of the war scenarios. I mean, the violence, the insecurity. I mean, these kids can be killed just because they are going to school, or just because they are crossing the borders, not the Mexican border or the American border, the borders in their own cities. I mean, there are borders that divide regions controlled by different gangs. So if they cross the border between the region owned by one gang and then they go to a different region, they can be killed just because of these kind of confusions. So it is impossible for them to stay there. And I think that in their stories, what we learned is that what we can learn is that first, that we, I mean, I was the first reader, the first one who listened to their stories. And second, the readers of the stories. I think that we have to be aware and conscious of our privileges and our situation. And that we can't judge those kids from our privileges, that we have to empathize with them, that we have to think in their situations and in what's happening in their countries. And in order to do that, we would need to understand what's going on there, to study the situation. And that is something that it's not happening in the news, that it's not happening in the social media or in the public discussions. And that's why many, many times it's so easy for us to make a judgment about immigration and to say this wouldn't be happening. But we have to think in their situation and in the situation of their countries.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree with your point about understanding the situations within this country. And I'd like to turn it to chapter 7.
Buenos dias, Señor Villalobos. My name is Patrick. In chapter 7, Miguel's reason for leaving his home was persecution because of his sexual orientation. And I have a question. When you wrote this chapter, what was your thinking behind alternating the dialogue between Miguel Angel and Caesar and Miguel Angel's retelling of his life story?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories. I don't know. It's not okay to say this is one of my favorite stories, but it is. I mean, because I like him a lot. I mean, this was a very sweet guy, very, very smart, very sentimental. I mean, and he explained his story in a very, it touched me a lot, his story. So I would like to talk again about the thing about their situations. Imagine his situation. He was living in a small island in a very small village of 500 people. And he was being bullied, and he was suffering harassment, and he was threatened by violence just because he was gay. And this is one of the situations of no future. I mean, there was no future for this kid in his hometown. He had to live. Even his family was against him. So he had to look for a new life. And when he was telling me the story, at some point, after the explanation about the origins of his migration, that was very dramatic. After that, suddenly when he was talking about the journey, he started to be happy, like to laugh, to some kind of joy was in his story. And it was because he met someone during the journey. So he fell in love during the journey. So, and for me, as a writer, and as a writer of fiction, I thought that at this point, I mean, it was very nice and very literary to think in that scene, even in those kind of situations, very terrible and very dramatic, then suddenly something can happen, something that change your life and something that can be good. And that's why I decided to focus that part of the story in the relation between those two who met in the journey. And I mean, it is important to say that those stories, I mean, the ones in the book, are not closed. I mean, the kids are still living. I mean, they are continuing with their lives, and actually, I don't know what happened to them. I mean, after that, I mean, we just know the story from the beginning to a certain point. That is the end of the story in the book. That is the time when they arrive to the United States and they can or not make some arrangements to have papers. But the thing is that their lives are still going on, are moving. And in the case of this teenager, he was still in a very complicated situation because his father, who lives in New York, doesn't accept his sexual orientation. So he ran away from harassment and violence in his hometown to meet with his parent who was living in New York. But when he arrived in New York, he found out that his father doesn't accept him. So it's not easy to write about these issues because many times they don't have happy endings. But I think that it is important to tell these kind of stories.
Buenas tardes. My name is Isa Kareem, and my question is: was sexual orientation a common factor in the cases and stories that you researched?
It wasn't the main factor. It was one of the factors. I think that is most important the violence against women. Many of the stories of this kind of immigration start with violence against women. It's not just about the kid or the teenager that is making the journey. It starts before, for example, with his or her mother, that many times is alone, was abandoned by the father, and is suffering from different kind of violences. So I have to say that one of the findings of the writing of this book for me, and that it wasn't um, nice thing to understand about the world we lived in is the role that we men are playing in the families and in our societies. We the men are responsible of most of the violence in our societies, and we have to be conscious about that, to be aware about that, and to do something, because we are creating violence inside our families, violence against our wives, our daughters, our friends. We are creating violence in the streets, in the gangs, or different kind of wars and violence of drug trafficking, etc. So we are responsible for that, and honestly, that was tough to understand that. I mean, that was like a big disappointment for me, like to understand that. And it's not that is something that we can't change. I mean, but right now it is like that, and we have to accept that because we need to change it. We are, I mean, and I'm talking about men. We are toxic, and we need to change that. We are creating a lot of suffering and a lot of violence. And if we don't accept that, and if we don't learn how to change it, we will continue to create all that suffering.
Thank you so much for your insight. So now that we've asked questions about chapters 3 and 7, we'd like to reflect on the topic of child migration.
Good afternoon, and thanks for meeting with us. My name is Daniel, and the question I had was, what's the most important thing you hope people remember or walk away with after reading the book?
The most important thing, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing well.
The most important thing that you hope people will remember or take with them when they read your book?
Well, I was talking about empathize. I mean, my idea was to create a book that maybe if I succeed would create a experience of reading that could give the reader an idea of the lives and sufferings of those kids and teenagers, and to understand that our lives are very different, and that the privileges that we have, and even me, I mean, I have been very privileged. I was talking about that I'm an immigrant, that I'm let's say a high standard immigrant. I mean, I came to live in Spain to study a PhD with papers, with a legal residence, etc. So I can't compare myself to those kids. And I think that there are some details in the stories that can make us understand that it's almost like if we lived in different planets. I mean, it's different. Our differences are. We live in a very unequal world, and the realities of, of those kids and teenagers deserve an effort that we have to make to understand and not to judge just based on our prejudices or in our ideology. We need to make an effort to understand the world we are living in, and to understand why some people, like these kids, are making some decisions. And the answer is that most of those kids, or all of those kids maybe, are simply just running away from a sure death. And they are trying to build a possible life. And it is important to understand that the title in Spanish is different. In Spanish, the book is called Yo tuve un sueño. I had a dream. That is one of the things that a teenager told me, that she had a dream, and the dream was to become a human rights lawyer. And that idea of having a dream, obviously, in American culture, connects with Martin Luther King, etc. And that's why we changed the title in English in order to not to confuse about the subject. But the idea of a dream, when we think about dreams, we used to think about nice things. I mean, I dream with living in a place that I like a lot. I dream of having a nice car. I dream of making a trip to Japan, or to Mars, or to the moon, if you want. But we don't dream with things like, I would like not to be killed, or I dream with having food, clothes, health, education, things that we have, and that we don't need to dream about. So we have to imagine, what would it be if we need to dream about those kind of things? I mean, the most basic things. Our safety, for example. The safety of knowing that when you come back from school to your home, you won't be killed. This is not a dream, or this should not be a dream.
Good afternoon, Mr. Villalobos. Here on the topic of child migration, my question would be, What saddens you the most about the experiences of these teenagers and other migrants? And what gives you the most hope in the future about these migrants?
Well, I think that we have been talking uh, about the origins and the motivations of the migration, but I was very interested in their ideas of the future. I mean, they were living in the United States when I interviewed them. Some of them were in a legal situation. I mean, they were uh, preparing or already received some papers of legal residence, so they could face the future. Some of them were trying to do that, and I think that what really touched me was that when they finally arrived to the United States and when they finally could meet with relatives or with a family, with a guardian who will take care of them. And when they finally had this normal situation, when they finally are not threatened by reality, they can dream about normal things like we do. I mean, and this is very important because this means that there is hope. There is something, I mean, your life can change. I mean, the life of these kids can change. There is hope. And it is important to say that, to say that, because I think that in some way the book can be depressing. It's tough. I mean, the stories are some of them are very sad. But I wanted that the book could also be a source of hope. I mean, we can make things to change the world. I mean, maybe we can't change everything and change the world in a utopian way, but we can contribute to change apparently small things, but that in the long term they will mean important changes. And I believe that that's why we are here. I mean, we have to contribute, not just as individuals. I mean, we have to think in our society and obviously in our near society. I mean, I'm not talking about solving the world problems, but writing this book for me was a contribution, making what I know how to do, that is write a book. I mean, I can't, I'm not a lawyer and I can't defend these kids in the court. I'm not an activist. I don't run an NGO to protect these kids. But I can do something, is to write this book, to talk about these books, to talk about these kids, and to contribute to change the perception about their realities.
Thank you very much. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Luke, and I worry that a lot of times these migrants are thought of as statistics or numbers more often than they are thought of as people. And you obviously wrote a book about this, but in our day-to-day life, how can we best humanize the struggle that they face at the border?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think that one of the things that we have to learn when I was talking about trying to understand the world that we live in is that we need to learn to listen. We don't listen. I mean, we don't listen to the others. We want to talk. We want to explain our vision and our perspective and how we see things. But it seems like we don't want to listen. And if we don't want to listen, we won't understand. So humanize means understanding and means listening. So if we want to go beyond the statistics, beyond the numbers, so we have to go to see the details. We have to go to see the stories. And that means that we need to listen. And listen means to open up, and even to be open to change our ideas and to change our prejudices. I mean, we have to be ready to even, we have to be ready even to discover that we were wrong, and that we have to change our opinion, that we have to change the way we think and the way we act, and that's okay. I mean, life is changing, and there's nothing wrong about being wrong. I mean, we need to listen to the others.
Thank you very much for that answer.
And this is our last question. So Sam.
Hi there, Senor Villalobos. My name is Sam and I'm an aspiring writer. So my question for you as a professional author, what would you say your biggest tip or recommendation is for someone like me or anybody out there that wants to tell stories as deep and as personal as these?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's something similar to what I just said. Well, first, I would say that the most important thing for a writer is to read a lot, and to know your literary tradition, and to discover the books and authors that you like and those that you don't like, and why, and to understand the world that is surrounding you, and the people and the subjects are in discussion around you, because you will be writing about that. I mean, sometimes writers are very concentrated on ourselves, like with this idea of writing, that the writer is some kind of genius that can suddenly all by himself understands the truth and the beauty of life and reality. But it doesn't work like that. I mean, we need to interact. We need to know people, to know the tradition, and again, to listen. This is something that I'm very obsessed with. We need to listen, and we need to learn to see and to look and to watch. We have to train our ear and our vision in order to describe the things that we see from our point of view.
Thank you again for your recommendations and your tips and all that. It was very, very, very insightful, very helpful. So thank you for that.
I would like to say again, thank you, Mr. Villalobos, for the interesting and thoughtful discussion that we had. I want to transition to finishing some more acknowledgements. First, we'd like to thank the participants for coming up with the many thoughtful and evocative questions that we asked, and for being at school on a day off, for facilitating the event, and for being leaders. We would also like to thank the freshmen for witnessing the event and for opening your minds and hearts to such a difficult and polarizing issue. We also like to thank the moderators, tech support, and librarians for all taking care of the logistics and for taking the time to set up the event and for helping our leaders. Thank you all.
So one more time, thank you, Juan Pablo, for your flexibility, and it was definitely a very insightful conversation. So you're going to receive an email from me soon, and also a package will go to your home in Spain. We wanted to show you our appreciation with something concrete. So you will be.
Thank you very much.
Hi, nice meeting you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.